You were taught something about getting older. Not in a classroom, not in a book. It was not a lesson with a date and a teacher and a moment you can point to. It was something absorbed slowly, the way children absorb everything that matters, through observation, through repetition, through the 1,000 small signals that the world sends before you are old enough to question them. You watched what happened to the older people around you, how they were spoken to, how they were spoken about, how they moved through rooms differently once a certain age arrived, quieter, smaller, less certain of their right to take up space, how the world's attention shifted away from them gradually and then all at once, the way interest leaves a conversation when something newer enters the room. You watched and you learned. You learned what aging looked like. You learned what was expected. You learned, without anyone ever saying it directly, that there was a point past which a person was supposed to need less, want less, expect less. A point past which ambition became undignified and desire became embarrassing, and the appropriate posture was one of graceful reduction. You learned that getting older meant getting smaller, and that lesson, absorbed so early and reinforced so consistently that it became invisible, is now operating inside you, right now, quietly, efficiently, doing exactly what it was always going to do if no one ever stopped to name it for what it is. It is killing the life left in you, and you did not even know it was there. That is what I want to talk to you about today. Not aging. Aging is not the problem. The problem is the story you were handed about aging before you were old enough to refuse it. The story that arrived disguised as wisdom, as realism, as the mature acceptance of how things are. The story that told you your best years had a fixed address somewhere behind you, and that the appropriate response to where you are now was to turn down the volume on yourself and wait. That story is a lie, and I need you to understand not just that it is a lie, but where it came from. Because a lie you can trace is a lie you can put down. Where did it come from? It came from a world that organizes itself around productivity, around output, around the measurable contribution of a body and a mind to an economy that runs on what people can produce. In that world, older people represent something inconvenient. They represent the end of peak productivity. They represent cost rather than return. And the most efficient way to manage that inconvenience is to convince the people experiencing it that their own diminishment is natural, that wanting less is wisdom, that stepping back is grace, that the quieting of the self is simply what getting older looks like. The world did not teach you to age gracefully. It taught you to disappear politely, and it called that grace so you would not resist it. You believed it because you had no reason not to, because everyone around you believed it too, because the evidence seemed to support it. You could see it happening to the people ahead of you, the shrinking, the fading, the gradual departure from the center of things, and you understood without being told explicitly that this was the path, that this was what came next. But here is what that story never told you. Here is what it could not afford to tell you, because if you knew it, the whole architecture of the lie would come apart. The diminishment you observed was not aging, it was belief. It was people living out a story they had been handed, contracting to fit a container that was never the true size of who they were. What you witnessed was not the natural consequence of years lived. It was the consequence of a narrative accepted, internalized, and acted upon so thoroughly that it became indistinguishable from reality. You are not watching your future in those memories. You are watching what happens when a person believes a lie long enough, and the lie has been in you long enough. Think about what it has already cost you. The desires you talked yourself out of because they seemed inappropriate for someone your age. The ideas you kept quiet because you assumed no one would take them seriously anymore. The version of yourself you stopped presenting to the world because the world had already made clear it was no longer particularly interested. The mornings you woke up and felt the subtle but persistent pressure to want less today than you wanted yesterday, and to call that maturity. That pressure is the lie doing its work. Every day, every morning. Every time you looked in the mirror and the first thought was about decline rather than about life. Every time you caught yourself starting a sentence with, "I used to," and felt underneath the words, the implication that the using was finished. Every time you deferred to someone younger in a room, not because they knew more, but because you had somewhere learned that youth was authority and age was its quiet surrender. That is not wisdom. That is a wound. And it has been open for long enough. Here is the truth the lie replaced. the truth that was always there underneath it, waiting for someone to say it clearly enough that it could be heard. Your life did not peak before you got here. Your value did not expire on a date someone else decided. The capacity inside you for presence, for depth, for genuine connection, for the particular kind of understanding that only comes from having actually lived, none of that is behind you. All of it is here. All of it is available. All of it is waiting for you to stop measuring it against a lie and start using it as what it actually is, which is everything. The young have energy. The young have possibility in the abstract, the wide-open horizon of a life not yet tested. But they do not have what you have. They cannot have it yet. It cannot be downloaded or studied or rushed into existence. It can only be lived into, slowly, through real years of real experience. And you have lived into it whether you knew that was what you were doing or not. What you carry now is not the remnant of something that used to be more. It is the fullest version of what you have always been. Refined, concentrated, stripped of the noise and the performance and the proving that occupied so much of the earlier years. The lie told you that refinement was loss. The truth is that it is arrival. You have arrived at something real, something the lie tried to convince you was nothing, something the world, in its obsession with what is new, does not know how to value, but its inability to value it does not change what it is. What it is your life, fully yours, with everything you have earned and everything you have survived and everything you have become on the other side of all of it. Stop living inside the lie. It was never yours to begin with. It was handed to you by a world that needed you to believe it, and you believed it in good faith, and now you know what it is, and knowing changes everything. You are not what that lie said you were. You never were, and the life still ahead of you is not what the lie said it would be either. It is more than that. It has always been more than that. Live like it. I want you to do something, not later. Right now, while these words are still in the air, I want you to think of one thing you stopped allowing yourself to want because the lie told you it was no longer appropriate. Not the big things, the quiet ones, the ones that never made it onto any list because they seemed too small to mention, or too large to be realistic, or simply too much like the desires of someone younger than you currently believe yourself to be. A conversation you have been postponing. A place you stopped letting yourself imagine visiting. A version of your mornings that look different from the one you currently accept. A relationship you stopped investing in because the lie told you the returns would not justify the effort. A creative impulse you buried under the reasonable conclusion that the time for that had passed. Whatever it is, I want you to notice that it is still there, that you still know what it is, that the wanting did not actually go away, it just went underground, beneath the surface of the daily accepting, still alive, still specific, still yours. The lie told you that wanting was the problem, that the mature response to desire was to reduce it until it stopped causing friction against reality. That peace came from wanting less, but peace that comes from wanting less is not peace. It is the absence of the tension that makes a life feel like it is going somewhere, and a life that is not going somewhere is not a life at peace. It is a life that has stopped. You have not stopped, not completely. The fact that something in you responded to these words, that something recognized itself in what was being described, that something leaned forward even slightly at the suggestion that the lie was a lie. That is not the response of a person who has stopped. That is the response of a person who was waiting for permission to begin again. You have it, not from me. I am not the source of any permission worth having. The permission you need is yours, it was always yours, and the only thing that ever stood between you and it was a story someone else wrote about what your life was supposed to look like from here. That story is finished now. Write your own. The lie is over. What comes next is the truth. And the truth is that you are here. You are alive. You are more than what that lie made of you. And every single day that remains is an argument against everything it tried to convince you of. Make the argument. Live it loudly enough that the lie cannot find room to breathe. That is all that is being asked of you. That, and nothing less, is what your life is still waiting for you to give.